On the 14th of March, 2009, in the small Bavarian town of Grünfeld, population 1140, a woman named Marta Voss was officially declared dead. She had been missing for 6 weeks. Her car, a silver Opel Vectra, had been found abandoned on the bank of the Regen River, driver's door wide open, engine still running. Her coat was inside. Her shoes were on the gravel. The official ruling was drowning. Accidental. The body was never recovered. The region had flooded that winter, they said. The current could have taken her miles downstream, into the Danube, into nothing. Her husband Klaus Voss wept at the memorial service. The whole town wept with him. Flowers were placed by the river. Her photograph, smiling, warm, alive, was printed in the Grünfelder. Except 3 years later, a woman matching her exact description walked into a police station in Vienna, Austria. She gave her name as Anna Reiter. She said she had witnessed a murder. She said the murder had happened in Grünfeld. And when the Austrian detective ran her fingerprints, out of routine, out of protocol, the system didn't return the name Anna Reiter. It returned Marta Voss, a dead woman, murdered in Bavaria. Except she was standing right in front of him. What followed was one of the most twisted, most disturbing criminal investigations in modern German, Austrian history, a case that exposed not just one murderer, but an entire system of silence, complicity, and a conspiracy that had been buried for over a decade. This is the story of Marta Voss, the woman the town of Grünfeld tried to erase, twice. To understand what happened to Marta Voss, you have to understand Grünfeld. Grünfeld sits in the Bavarian forest, about 40 kilometers east of Regensburg, close to the Czech border. It is exactly the kind of town that shows up on postcards. Old farmhouses, a river, a church that has been standing since Fidesz. The Voss family had lived in Grünfeld for 4 generations. They owned the largest farm supply business in the region, Voss Agrar GmbH, which supplied seed, machinery, and fertilizer to most of the farms in the Bavarian forest. They were not aristocrats, but they were as close as Grünfeld got. The man who wept at his wife's memorial was the 3rd-generation owner of Voss Agrar. He was 44 years old when Marta disappeared. Respected, civic-minded. He sat on the local town council. He organized the Christmas market every year. He was, by all accounts, a good man. Marta Voss was 38. She had been married to Klaus for 11 years. They had one daughter, Lena, who was 7 at the time of her mother's disappearance. By the accounts of those who knew her, neighbors, the local school teacher, the woman who ran the bakery on Kirchenstrasse, Marta was warm, generous. She volunteered at the school. She helped organize the church summer fair. But she was also, according to at least 2 people, deeply unhappy. Her closest friend, a woman named Ingrid Haas, would later tell investigators, much later, after she finally felt safe enough to speak, that in the months before she vanished, Marta had been frightened, that she'd said something was wrong, that she'd found something she wasn't supposed to find. Ingrid didn't report this at the time of Marta's disappearance. She would spend 12 years trying to forgive herself for that. The investigation into Marta's disappearance in 2009 lasted exactly 19 days. It was led by a single detective, a man named Hauptkommissar Werner Schubel, who concluded that the evidence pointed overwhelmingly to accidental drowning. The case was closed. Werner Schubel, we would later learn, had been the Voss family's neighbor for 22 years. He had attended Klaus Voss's wedding. His children had played with their children. That detail would become very important. Here is where the story stops being a tragic drowning and starts being something much darker. Voss Agrar GmbH was a legitimate business, mostly. Between 2004 and 2009, the company had been doing something else too. Running alongside the farm supplies, invisible inside the legitimate accounts, was a secondary operation, and it had nothing to do with seeds or fertilizer. In the early 2000s, the Czech border region had become a transit zone for organized crime moving contraband westward into Germany. Cigarettes, primarily, untaxed, laundered through legitimate businesses. The profits were extraordinary. hundreds of thousands of euros annually, and the risk for a well-connected business with storage facilities and a fleet of trucks was remarkably low. Klaus Voss had been approached in 2003. He had said yes, and he had been careful, meticulous, even, about keeping the two sets of books completely separate. The man who ran the Czech side of the operation was named Pavel Horek. He was not known to Bavarian police at the time. He would become very well known later. For 5 years, the arrangement worked perfectly, until Marta Voss started going through the company accounts. She was not the company accountant, but after Klaus's father suffered a stroke in late 2008, Marta had taken over some of the administrative duties while Klaus managed the operation. It was temporary. It was innocent. She was simply trying to help her husband. And then sometime in January 2009, she found the second ledger. We know this because of what Marta did next. She didn't confront Klaus immediately. Instead, she photographed every page of the ledger on her phone. She emailed the photographs to herself. And then she drove to Ingrid Hass's house and told her friend that she thought Klaus was involved in something criminal. Ingrid told investigators that Marta was calm, almost eerily calm. She said Klaus didn't know she'd found it. She said she needed time to decide what to do. She had 3 weeks. On the 14th of February, Valentine's Day, Klaus Voss gave his wife a card and a box of neighbour marzipan, which was her favorite. He kissed her on the cheek. He drove their daughter to school. And somewhere in that window, between the morning and the night, everything changed. Because on the 15th of February, Marta Voss was gone. When Marta's car was found on the riverbank on the 22nd of February, a week after she'd vanished, the official timeline would later be scrutinized in extraordinary detail. Question 1. Why did it take a week to find the car? Answer. Because nobody reported her missing for 5 days. And when they did, when Ingrid Hass finally went to the Grünfeld police station on the 5th of February, she was told that Marta had probably gone to visit relatives in Munich. That Klaus had mentioned this. That there was no cause for alarm. There were no relatives in Munich. Klaus knew this. The officer who spoke to Ingrid, a junior constable named Franz Weidner, would later say he had relayed her concern to his superior, Hauptkommissar Schubel, and been told to file no report. Question 2. Who found the car? A farmer named Georg Lindt, who used the track to access his fields. He called the police on the 22nd. They arrived within the hour. Schubel himself came to the scene. Georg Lindt would later tell investigators that when Schubel arrived and saw the car, he didn't look surprised. That was what Georg said. He said Schubel walked directly to the car, didn't circle it, didn't scan the bank. He walked straight to the driver's door and looked inside, like he already knew where to look. Schubel opened the door with his bare hand. No gloves, no evidence bag. The fingerprint evidence from the driver's door was consequently contaminated before forensics arrived. Was that a mistake possible? Was it deliberate? By 2012, investigators from Munich would have a very specific opinion on that question. The official investigation lasted 19 days. There was no dive search of the river, too flooded, said the report. There was no forensic examination of the Voss home. No evidence of a crime on the premises, said the report. There was no interview with Pavel Horek or any Czech national, no known connection to the missing person, said the report. And there was no mention, not a single word of the emails Marta had sent to herself. The emails containing photographs of the second ledger. Because Klaus Voss had access to Marta's email. He had known her password for years. She'd given it to him when he needed to forward something from her account. Early in their marriage, she had never changed it. She probably never thought to. He deleted the emails on the 15th of February. The same day she disappeared. But here is the first twist in this story. The first of many. She had BCC'd the photographs every single page of the ledger, to a draft email account she had created just for that purpose. An account Klaus didn't know existed. An account she had registered under the name Anna Reiter. Marta Voss had been preparing for the possibility that something might happen to her. She had created an escape hatch. And this is the part that took investigators 3 years to piece together. She used it. Marta Voss did not drown in the Regen River. On the night of the 14th of February, after Klaus fell asleep, Marta took her daughter's school photo from the refrigerator, took €300 from the emergency cash envelope they kept in the kitchen drawer, and walked out of the house through the back garden. She had arranged the car herself. She had driven it to the riverbank 2 days earlier, after telling Klaus she was visiting Ingrid. She had left her coat and her shoes inside it, deliberately. She had left the engine running. She walked 6 kilometers through the forest to a crossroads at the edge of the municipality. There, a woman she had never met before. A woman she had found through an online forum for domestic abuse survivors, was waiting in a car. Her name was Renate Kobler. She was from Passau. Renate Kebler ran an informal network, entirely underground, entirely unofficial, that helped women disappear. Not from domestic abuse in the traditional sense, but from situations of danger, situations where the police were not an option, situations exactly like Marta's. Marta had been in contact with Renate for 3 weeks. She had transferred €1,000 to a cash drop in Regensburg. She had prepared 2 things: the email account with the evidence and a plan to survive. Renate drove Marta to a safe house in Linz, just across the Austrian border. She stayed there for 4 months, under the name Anna Reiter, the same name she had used for the email account. For those 4 months, Marta Voss watched the news. She watched the investigation into her disappearance unfold from a laptop screen. She watched Schubel declare it accidental. She watched Klaus give an interview to a local TV channel, his voice breaking, asking for anyone with information to come forward. And she made a decision that, by her own account later, was the hardest of her life. She decided to wait. She needed the evidence to mean something. A frightened woman with photographs of a ledger walking into a police station was not enough. She knew Klaus's connections. She knew Schubel. She knew the reach of the Voss name in the region. She needed to build something airtight before she came forward. She found work in Vienna. Office administration. She moved into a flat in the Vorventh district, the Rudolfsheim. For nobody asked question, she built a life as Anna Reiter. She was, by every official measure, dead. But she was also, very slowly, building her case. Here is where the second major twist arrives, and it changes the entire shape of the story. 2 years into Marta's hidden life as Anna Reiter, a man was killed in Vienna. His name was Tom Blayek. He was Czech. He was found in a canal in the 30N district with 2 bullet wounds in the back of his skull. Tom Blayek was, as Austrian police quickly established, a low-level courier in a transnational organized crime network. A network investigators would discover with roots in the Czech border region of Bavaria. Anna Reiter had seen who killed him. She had been walking home from the supermarket. She had taken a shortcut along the canal path, the same path she walked 3 times a week, and she had come around a corner just as 2 men were dragging a 3rd man to the edge of the water. She ran. She hid in a doorway 400 meters away, heart pounding, and watched one of the men walk back past her. She saw his face clearly. She photographed him on her phone through the gap in the doorway. The man she photographed was Pavel Hoders. Marta Voss stood in that doorway for 40 minutes, not moving, and then she walked home. And she did not call the police that night, because Anna Reiter, who did not officially exist, could not call the police without risking exposure, without risking everything she had built. She spent 4 months deciding what to do, and then she made the choice that would unravel everything. On the 4th of March Saibi, at T/TD in the morning, Anna Reiter walked into the Bundespolizei station on Lerchenfelder Urteil in Vienna's 7th district and said she wanted to report a murder. She said she had evidence. The detective who took her statement was named Hauptinspektor Daniel Kotz. He was 36. He had been on the organized crime desk for 4 years. He was, by all accounts, very good at noticing when something didn't add up. Within 20 minutes of the interview beginning, he excused himself, went to the bathroom, and called his supervisor. Because Anna Reiter's account of the murder was extraordinary, she had the photograph. She had the date, the time, the exact location. She described Horek by height, weight, hair color, and the specific scar she had seen on his left hand in the streetlight. But what made Kotz call his supervisor was not the testimony. It was the fingerprints. The routine fingerprints he had taken before the interview. Standard practice, which had just come back with a match from the German federal database. The woman calling herself Anna Reiter had the fingerprints of a dead woman named Marta Voss, a woman who had drowned in Bavaria 3 years ago. A closed case. Kotz walked back into the interview room, sat down and said, calmly, carefully, that there appeared to be a small discrepancy in her identification, and he asked her if she'd like to explain it. Marta Voss looked at him for a long moment, and then she said, "Yes, I think it is time." What happened next moved faster than anyone anticipated. Kotz's supervisor contacted the Bavarian State Criminal Office, the Landeskriminalamt, in Munich within the hour. A cold case review team was assembled by end of day. And within 48 hours of Marta Voss walking into that Vienna police station, 2 things happened simultaneously. In Vienna, Austrian investigators began a formal inquiry into the murder of Tom Black and the organized crime network connected to it. They had a witness. They had a photograph. They began the process of identifying and locating Pavel Hort. And in Bavaria, a team from Munich drove to Grünfeld. The first thing they did was execute a search warrant on the Voss Agrar GmbH premises. It was 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. Klaus Voss was still in his dressing gown when they arrived. The second ledger was still there. Klaus had never destroyed it. A catastrophic error that would later suggest to investigators that he genuinely believed the case was permanently closed and that he had no reason to fear discovery. In the ledger, they found something Marta hadn't photographed because she hadn't found it. A second section at the back, hidden under a false cover. This section wasn't about cigarettes. This section referenced a second network, not contraband. Pavel Horek was not just moving cigarettes. He had been moving people, undocumented migrants, primarily from Eastern Europe through Germany and into Western European countries. And Klaus Voss's trucks, his warehouses, his fuel accounts and driver schedules had been accommodating that network for at least 2 years. Klaus Voss was arrested at Südithau-en-Sieb on the 4th of March 17th. He said nothing. His lawyer arrived within the hour, and the lawyers who came were not from Grünfeld. They were from Frankfurt, which told investigators a great deal about the quality of Klaus Voss's connections. Hauptkommissar Werner Schubel was arrested the following day. He had not been warned. The investigation had been kept hermetically sealed. When they came to his door, he was watering his garden. Schubel said, reportedly, before the handcuffs were applied, "How is Marta?" He knew. He had known from the beginning. Investigators would later determine that Klaus Voss had told Schubel about Marta, finding the ledger within 2 days of it happening. That Schubel had advised Klaus, had arranged the discovery of the car, had ensured the investigation went nowhere. In exchange for what exactly was something his lawyers fought very hard to keep out of the prosecution case. They were partially successful, but not entirely. There is one part of this story I have not addressed yet, and it is in many ways the part that makes everything else feel small. Lena Voss was 7 when her mother disappeared. She was 10 when her father was arrested. She grew up believing, as every person in Grünfeld believed, that her mother had drowned, that she had been abandoned, that she was an orphan of accident and fate. She was raised during the investigation by her paternal grandmother, Klaus Voss's mother, who was herself devastated, who herself apparently knew nothing about the second ledger, or the second ledger. The grandmother's involvement, or lack thereof, was examined closely. Investigators were satisfied she was innocent. She became Lena's anchor through everything that followed. Marta Voss, in Vienna, knew about Lena. She had never stopped thinking about Lena. She had made an impossible calculation that coming forward too soon, before the evidence was airtight, would destroy everything, and that Lena would be safer, in the short term, with her father in Grünfeld, than with a mother who had no legal identity and no protection from Horsekaysnout. Whether that calculation was correct is something Marta herself has said she will never be sure of. Whether it was a mother's pragmatism or a mother's abandonment is a question only Lena could answer. The two of them met for the first time in 4 years on the 9th of April 2012, in a secure family liaison room in Munich, with a social worker present. What happened in that room is not a matter of public record. Nobody was there except the social worker, and she has never spoken about it. Lena has never spoken about it. Marta has never spoken about it. What we know is that they left the building together. They got into the same car, and they did not live in Grünfeld again. The trial of Klaus Voss and Werner Schobel began in Munich in September 2013. It ran for 11 weeks. Klaus Voss was charged with conspiracy to commit tax fraud through the operation of a fraudulent ledger system, accessory to the smuggling and unlawful transport of persons, and the charge his legal team fought hardest against: conspiracy in the suspected staged disappearance of a person, specifically his wife, Marta Voss. That last charge was the difficult one, because to prove conspiracy in a staged disappearance, prosecutors had to establish that Klaus had known Marta was still alive. They had allowed investigation to run its fraudulent course with that knowledge, which they did, through the forensic reconstruction of his phone records, showing 4 calls to Schobel on the 15th of February 2009, beginning at 6:14 a.m., before Marta had even reached Renate Keebler's. The prosecution theory: Klaus had discovered Marta's plan before she enacted it, not the email account. He thought he'd eliminated that, but the plan to leave. And rather than stop her, he had let her go, because a missing and presumed dead wife was more useful to him than a wife with evidence of his criminal operation, who could not be controlled. This theory was chilling in its cold logic, and it raised a question the prosecution returned to repeatedly. Did Klaus Voss love his wife? Or had he simply decided, at some point, that she was a problem he could solve by doing nothing? Voss was convicted. He received 12 years for the contraband conspiracy, 8 years for the person's smuggling accessory charge, to run concurrently, and 4 additional years for the conspiracy in the staged disappearance, to run consecutively. Total, 16 years. Werner Schobel received 9 years for perverting the course of justice, corruption, and accessory after the fact in the disappearance case. He was stripped of his pension and his professional rank. He was 61 years old at sentencing. Pavel Horekek was arrested in the Czech Republic in June 2012, extradited to Austria in November, and stood trial separately for the murder of Tom Mbliak and 19 other charges related to the smuggling network. He received a life sentence under Austrian law in 2014. Renate Keebler, the woman who waited at the crossroads, the woman who ran the underground network, was not charged. Austrian and German authorities reviewed her activities, and determined that while she had operated outside legal channels, her actions had, in the specific case of Marta Voss, enabled a witness to criminal activity to survive and ultimately testify. Prosecutorial discretion was exercised. Marta's friend, the woman who said nothing for 3 years, gave evidence for the prosecution. Her testimony about Marta's state of mind in January was considered pivotal. She was not charged. She moved away from Grünfeld shortly after the trial. Grünfeld, the town that had buried Marta Voss twice, once in a river, once in a closed file, changed after the trial, not all at once. Slowly. Voss Agrar GmbH was liquidated. The assets were seized as proceeds of mime. Several of the farmers who had relied on the company for decades had to find new suppliers at short notice. The economic impact on the town was significant. The Grünfelder Zeitung, the local newspaper that had printed Marta's photograph, that had called her disappearance a tragedy, that had run a tribute piece about Klaus Voss's strength and grief, published a front-page apology in November citing grief. It was 3 paragraphs long. It was considered by many to be inadequate. George Lint, the farmer who said Schubel had not looked surprised, gave his statement to the cold case investigators without being asked twice. He said later that he had always known something was wrong that day on the riverbank, but that he was one man in a small town, and he knew whose son Klaus Voss was, and whose neighbor Schubel was. And some things in small towns are not said out loud until someone from outside comes to ask. Franz Weidner, the constable who had filed no report when Ingrid came to the station, resigned from the police service in 2013. He was not prosecuted. He did not give public statements. He runs a hardware shop in Passau now. Marta Voss, her real name restored to her legally in 2012, gave a single public interview in 2015 to a German investigative magazine. She did not appear on camera. Her voice was altered. She was asked if she regretted disappearing. She said, "I regret that I had to. I regret that the town I lived in for 11 years was a place where disappearing was safer than staying. I regret every day I was not with my daughter. I do not regret being alive." She was asked if she had forgiven Klaus. She said, "That question assumes he wanted my forgiveness. He has never asked for it." She was asked about Lena. She said, "Lena is not a story. Lena is my daughter. She is not for you to have." The magazine respected that. They printed the interview in full, but they cut the section about Lena entirely. At Marta's request, all that appeared in that section of the layout was a single white rectangle. Empty, intentional. Marta Voss lives somewhere in Austria. She goes by a different name, not Anna Reiter, not Marta Voss. A third name, a name that is, finally, only hers. Lena is in her early 20s now. She has studied law. She does not speak publicly about her family. She is, by the accounts of those who know her, doing remarkably well. The Regen River still runs through the Bavarian forest. It floods every winter when the snow comes down from the mountains. The water rises over the banks and covers the gravel where the silver Opel Vectra once stood, engine running, coat inside, shoes left on the stones. But the river gives nothing back. And neither does Marta Voss.